Hey guys, this is Joanna from Custom Quilts. Today I'm going to be giving you some tips for my Moroccan Tiles quilt pattern. And the Moroccan Tiles quilt pattern features some Drunkard's Path templates. And so I'm going to show you what you're going to do when you get your pattern is you first want to print your templates at 100% in your printer options or at no scaling. And so the templates come with a 1/4 inch seam allowance included. When you cut them out, you want to make sure that you're cutting on the second outer line, because if you cut on the inner line, that's going to make your pieces too small. When you're sewing them together, you're going to lose your seam allowance. So one way to check to make sure that your template's printed out correctly is this 1 inch scale box. And so this is your reference point that you can use to double check your template size. Just take a quilting ruler, really any kind of ruler will work fine. And you're going to place your ruler over that box, and mine measures exactly 1 inch square. So that tells me that my templates are the perfect size that they're supposed to be for this pattern. What you're going to do now, another tip when you're printing, is you can see that this is printed on kind of flimsy, just standard printer paper. So you can either print on cardstock, that will kind of lengthen the life of your templates, or I have some lightweight cardboard that I got with a package of paper that I purchased. I'm all about kind of repurposing things that would normally go in the trash. This won't go through my printer, but what I've done in the past is I've cut these out and then glued them or taped them to the cardboard. And then those turn out to be really heavy duty and they last a long time. So you can see my templates here that I've got cut out. These were my first templates that I did when I was mocking up the pattern. So they look kind of rough, but I've used them hundreds of times to make several quilts with this pattern. And another tip that I have for you is to lengthen the life of these is to take some shipping tape and tape the outer edges of your templates, especially on the straight edges. And so you can do that. You can also tape the curves if you'd like to, but I find that's a little bit difficult, so I left mine open. And all that does is whenever you're tracing over and over again, it can kind of affect the sharp edges of your templates, and that can just lengthen the life a little bit. So that's printing and cutting out our templates. So we've got our templates. This is template 1 and this is template 2. So our next step is going to be tracing and cutting out fabrics. And I'm going to show you the best way to position these. So I've got this is a baby quilt that I'm working on right now. A little scrap piece of fabric, and I'm going to tell you I have the selvage down here. I left the selvage on so you could see what I was talking about. And the best way to position your templates is you always want your straight edges either parallel or perpendicular to your selvage. You don't ever want your straight edges kind of at a diagonal to the selvage. So the selvage is here, straight edge, straight edge. And the reason for that is we want to keep these straight edges straight cuts. And if we cut this on the diagonal to the selvage, then this long edge is going to have stretch to it, and we don't want that to happen. So when you're positioning your templates, you want to make sure that your straight edges are parallel or perpendicular to the selvage, just like this. And with your template 2, the same applies. And you can rotate your templates at a 90-degree angle so that they're like this, like this, like this, just not like this. So you can see the straight edges are diagonal to the selvage. That's really all you need to keep in mind whenever you're tracing your pieces to cut out. And before we move on, I'm going to show you kind of my optimal, most economical way to lay out my pieces. So I've kind of stacked them together to save the most fabric that I can. This was just a sample piece that I cut off, so I would have had pieces coming down over here if I had more fabric up there. But that's just something to kind of keep in mind. So let's grab our pink fabric again. And as far as marking utensils go, I like to use Frixion pins because they have a really precise point, or the ones that I use do anyways. However, if you're using a really dark fabric like a black or a dark gray, a lot of times this won't show up. And so in that case, I like to use a Choco liner with white chalk because those marks will come out and they're highly contrasting to dark fabrics. So that's just something to keep in mind. With the Frixion pen, I don't always use these to mark fabric just because the marks don't always come out. They do erase with heat, but if they're exposed to really cold temperatures, the marks can reappear. So it's important to remember when you're marking on your fabric, you want to keep your marks outside of the seam allowance. So you don't want to come inside this line right here. That's a no-go. You don't want to be writing in here. So just position your template on your fabric. Use whatever marking utensil you like. Make sure that it's not sliding around. And I like to use that glitter washi tape that has kind of a raised texture on the back of templates to keep it in place. It kind of has like a grippy effect that keeps the template from sliding on the fabric. So that's a good thing that you could do. Okay, so I'm tracing these just like that. So whenever I move my templates, you can see I've got my template 1 here, template 2 here. And there are 2 ways that I use to cut these out. I'll either hand cut them all, like if I have something I'm watching on TV, I'll sit on the couch and cut by hand. Or the way that I really like is I can take a ruler and a rotary cutter and I can cut my straight lines using that ruler to help me. And then go back and cut the curves by hand, or be very cautious if you decide to use a rotary cutter to cut your curves. So I'm just going to cut these out real quick. Boom, boom, boom. And honestly, this is probably the most time-consuming thing about this pattern, but it has a really great effect. So I'm going to very carefully use a rotary cutter to cut my curves. Okay, so I've got my 2 pieces. Now, in the pattern, you'll notice that we're not putting 2 pieces of the same color together. So the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to find the centers of your pieces and pin them together, and then in another video I'll show you how to sew them together. So I've got my white. For this pattern I'm using white and pink. I've got my white template 1 and my pink template 2 cut out and ready to go. So we need to mark the centers of the curves on each piece. So on template 1, it's this curve right here that we're going to find the center of, and template 2, this curve that we need to find the center of. So I'm going to fold template 1 in half on the curve and then kind of press with a little bit of pressure using your finger, and then open it up, and you can see you have a really crisp fold line right here. And I like to go ahead and go over that with my Frixion pen so it really stands out on both sides on the template 1 piece. Okay, and now you guessed it, we're going to do the same thing with template 2. So we're going to fold in half along the curve, matching the edges right here, and then just finger press and then mark that center as well. So now we're going to take our pin cushion, we're going to match these edges. And so whenever we're pinning these, there are several ways that you can sew these together. Once you get really good, you may not want to pin at all, and that's just personal preference. I recommend in the beginning that you pin with at least 3 pins, and if you're not comfortable with that, you can also fold along the curve, again matching the outside to the mark that you made, finger press again, make that mark. This way you have additional reference points if you want them. But I always kind of like to do the 3 pins because it saves time. starting out, you may want to use 5. And I'm doing the same thing on my template 2 piece. So I'm going to mark these. Okay, so first I'm going to show you how to pin using just 3 pins, and then we'll go back and do the 5. So I'm going to flip my, sorry about that, I'm going to flip this white piece is going to be right side down on top of my template 2 piece. And I'm going to match the center marks. So you can see the center marks right here. I'm going to match them, and I'm going to pin those centers. Then I'm going to take the outer corner, outer edges, and I'm going to line up the straight edges, as you can see I've done here, and the end of the curved edge. And then I'm going to place a pin really near to the edge of the fabric and pin there. And then do the same on the opposite end. So if you're only using the 3 pins, you're done and you're ready to take it to the sewing machine. And I know that that doesn't look like it's going to work, but I promise you that it will, and I'll show you that in the next video. If you're using 5 pins, then you're just going to match your other 2 reference points that you marked. And you're going to pin those together along the edges. Okay, so there's that one. Then we're going to go match these 2 guys right here. Put a pin in that. All right, guys, now we're ready to go sew. You can see this one looks like it's going to work a little bit better. So it's just personal preference, and hang out for a minute and watch the next video to see how we sew them together. Thanks.